Around a year or so ago, I built a Croxa, Titan of Death's Hunger deck, which was all about discarding my opponent's cards and then smacking them until I won the game. Eventually, it took a little while. This deck was quite strong, but it had a problem. Towards the mid to late game, it often kind of ran out of cards, just because I couldn't really find great card draw in the colors that fit into the theme. That is, with one exception. Geth's Grimoire. Geth's Grimoire is a 4-mana artifact that says whenever an opponent discards a card from their hand, you may draw a card. It's a very simple effect, but in a deck like Croxa, it's amazing, because of course we are making our opponents discard all the time, and so Geth's Grimoire lets us replenish our resources without much struggle. I ended up disassembling the Croxa deck, because it just wasn't particularly fun to play against, and that's something that I care a lot about. And so, as I took apart the list, the Geth's Grimoire went into storage. And so time passed until a friend of mine eventually built a Zurzov Chaos Rider deck. And while this isn't a proper discard deck, it still makes your opponents discard. This deck had a similar problem to my Croxa list, where it just kind of ran out of steam in the mid to late game. That is, unless of course he had a Geth's Grimoire in play. Now, as my friend played Geth's Grimoire and drew infinity cards off of it, I wasn't really paying too much attention, just because he also played Blood Moon and Meekstone, and I was getting mad at him over that. What a weeder. What a weeder. Anyways, Zurzov with Geth's Grimoire, very effective, but again, I got a little distracted. And so time passed some more, until a couple of weeks ago, I'm finding myself rifling through my collection, looking for any sort of inspiration for a new approach to the game. I'm always looking for new ways to draw cards and ramp, and then, as I was scrolling through, I found my Geth's Grimoire. Now, Geth's Grimoire, as I already said, is very powerful in discard decks, but as I looked at it, I started wondering, do you need to play this in a discard deck? Don't players discard cards in Commander all the time? For example, our opponents might be playing Shoreline Looter, which is just a little guy that makes them draw a card and discard a card. Or cards like Big Score that have discarding as an additional cost. Boseiju, who endures, is a channel land, and channeling requires you to discard the card. Secluded Steppe is a land that has cycling on it, which again is a discard-based effect. Plaguecrafter is just a creature that acts as removal, but occasionally makes your opponents discard as well. And of course, at the end of each turn, players have to discard down to 7 cards, which happens pretty frequently. So here's the theory. We don't need all of these. It's fine if there's 1 or 2 of these per player. And all of a sudden, the Geth's Grimoire is drawing us 4, 5, 10 cards. It tends to go really crazy if our opponents have strong card draw engines themselves, but are still limited by their maximum hand size. I thought this was an idea that was interesting enough to try, and so I started including Geth's Grimoire in all of my decks. Digitally, that was not a problem, but physically I actually ended up just carrying around my Geth's Grimoire, and at the beginning of each game I swapped out a random card from my deck. Well, not truly random, but like I picked a card, swapped it out of the Geth's Grimoire, and then just played. Importantly, I included no synergies for it, very intentionally. I just took existing decks that I already had, and I included a Geth's Grimoire without any additional support. Now, I'm not gonna lie, at first that felt a little bit silly, because I included a card in my deck that I had no way of triggering myself. I couldn't make my opponents discard. I had no way of actually using this ability. But as I started playing, the triggers began piling up. I was blown away by how often players discard, usually by overdrawing. That was the most common way that people would discard. But also there were just like a bunch of other effects that randomly happened to use discarding as a cost or as just a secondary thing that was happening in addition to what our opponent was actually trying to do. It wasn't unusual at all for me to draw 10 or more cards off of my Geth's Grimoire. So, today I'm here to sell you on this card. I'm trying to convince you that Geth's Grimoire is a card that is genuinely good and maybe something that you should consider including as just a generic card draw effect. It's only 4 mana, it's colorless, which means it fits into any deck, And it's not expensive, as in, it doesn't cost a lot of real-life money, which is nice because a lot of card draw effects on this level tend to be on the more expensive side. Now, I'm gonna be the first to say that it's not flawless. 4 mana can be a lot, and since I've been talking about playing it without synergy, that means we can't trigger it ourselves. And that can be clunky, that can be difficult to rely upon. It also gets countered by cards like Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower, which are very common. If our opponents have no maximum hand size, then they're not gonna be discarding down to hand size at the end of their turn, and that of course means no Geth Grimoire triggers for us. I've had games where this card drew me nothing. I played it and I drew not a single card off of it. However, that was in games where my opponents had Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower, so my opponents kind of had a counter to it. If they didn't have those cards in play, they would have discarded at the end of their turn and the Geth Grimoire would have triggered. Which means the card itself is fine if we enable it. So let's stop thinking about Geth Grimoire as just this card that we include without any synergy, because that's not great deck building. Let's think about it and let's see if we can maybe find some things that work with it. In red, it's really easy. We just include wheels, like for example Magus of the Wheel. That's already a good card to have, and this is something that will replenish our hand, but with a Geth Grimoire, it will just give us 600 cards to play with, which is incredible. We can just sculpt the perfect plan for our current game. Blue has wheels as well, like Windfall, but I also found a really cool early game creature called Lore Broker, which is a 2-mana 1/3 that taps to make all players loot. And that of course triggers the Geth Grimoire. I like having this creature just for its effect. It's nice to be able to loot every turn, and sure my opponents do it too, but that's okay. It means they're not gonna be mad with me. But if we have the Geth Grimoire in play, this guy taps to make us loot and then draw 3 cards, which is incredible. That is so powerful. In black, we of course have access to actual discarding effects that are attached to otherwise good utility cards, like for example Rankle, Master of Pranks, or The Eldest Reborn. Now in white or green, things are a bit more difficult because we can't actually make our opponents discard. However, in white, we get cards like Secret Rendezvous, which we can play on a player that we know has too many cards in hand already, and then by just kind of giving them even more cards, we're ensuring that they're going to be discarding at the end of their turn. My favorite plan though is Lauren of the Third Path, which we can tap to make us and another player draw a card. So we just wait until the turn passes to a player that goes to their end step with 7 cards in hand, or even more than that, and then we use Lauren, let them draw, and then discard, and so we draw an additional one. Green, on the other hand, just needs to be satisfied with blowing up a Thought Vessel. I mean, you have stuff like Reclamation Sage. You're so good at clearing out artifacts that should not be a problem. I also think that any deck, just in general, should include a Demolition Field, but if you are playing a Geth Grimoire, you definitely need to have some targeted land destruction like Demolition Field or similar effects. And that brings us to our most powerful, most perfect card to include with the Geth Grimoire, the card that has me most excited about all of this, and that is Gaia Reach Sanitarium. It's a land that enters untapped, taps for a colorless mana, and for 2 mana, we can tap it to make all players loot. Which means this thing right here is a land for 3 mana. We draw 4 cards, discard 1. Oh my god, how incredible is that? Every single turn we can just use that to build a massive, massive advantage. It's also incredible because it too is colorless. We can include it in any deck. So the most simple shell that you can include in any deck is Gaia Reach Sanitarium and Geth Grimoire. They come with no disadvantages, they are super easy to include, and they just give you an incredible out if you get lucky and have both available. Now I can understand if you still don't believe. I mean, this is unhinged, right? This doesn't make any goddamn sense. So I ask one thing of you. If you don't believe, do me one favor. Next time you play Commander, just take note of how often players are discarding. You will be blown away by how frequent it actually is, and by how many Geth Grimoire triggers you might be missing out on per game. Now, if you do believe, and you are now a Geth Grimoire follower like me, then I invite you to the Geth Grimoire meta, where every player always has a Geth Grimoire in play. So whenever somebody discards, 3 additional cards are drawn. Those 3 cards are then discarded. We're drawing 9, 27. It escalates from there. Infinite resources. We're all milling ourselves out of the game, and we're very quickly coming to the realization that actually we need to rework Commander in its entirety. We remove Commander damage and increase the deck size to 300, because that's the only way to survive in a meta where everybody has infinite resources because of Geth's Grimoire. The game just escalates to a state where nobody is able to shuffle anymore. And it's perfect. It's flawless. We all die a happy death. And the only thing that we see on the other side is this beautiful, wonderful, smiling face. Is it smiling? I don't know. It's kind of a little bit spooky. Maybe this is not actually a good direction to head into. Anyways, give it a try. Feel free to just get yourself a Geth Grimoire. Again, it's cheap, but you can just proxy it. Just carry it around. Just do what I did, right? Just take a Geth Grimoire at the start of each game, take out a random card out of your deck, put in the Geth Grimoire, and you'll be surprised by how effective it can be. It does also sometimes do nothing, though, so be open to that, right? Like, we're looking for averages here. Sometimes this card is shit. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes you just play it and it does nothing. But very occasionally only. Most of the time, this thing just draws you cards like crazy. Anyways, I have been inspired. I think this card is so sick. It is so cool. And I just needed to tell you about it. Let me know what you think about videos dedicated to just a single card like this. We're still experimenting. We're still figuring our way around this whole magic thing. A bit of a shorter one, which is something we're trying to do, although the recording is getting a little bit long, but I think we'll trim it down a lot. And I hope you guys enjoy it. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I'll see you guys soon.